Absolutely.
All right, and we say thank you to our sponsors. Did you want to say anything there?
Nope. Just thanks to ClassFlow for this event and next week's Reinventing the Classroom. And thanks to Blackboard Collaborate for this terrific platform that serves us so well.
It does actually. I really like it. It's my presentation software of choice. There you go. Put my little star on the map. Perfect. We're on the same latitude. All right. I'm doing my Doctorate of Education about audiobooks, downloadable audiobooks on personal devices. So students choosing to listen to audiobooks and pre-adolescent students, and trying to find out what their perceptions are of their literacy, of changes in their literacy after listening to downloadable audiobooks extensively. And I found some very interesting information from my participants, and I've learned an awful lot from them. So as a teacher librarian, I am very keen on stories, and I really want kids just to be addicted to story in any format. So I don't mind at all. I equally prefer listening to audiobooks as reading, so I don't really have a preference. But and I've been listening to audiobooks for a very, very long time too. So back when we had to stuff every pocket full of tapes when we went for a walk, I'm very, very glad that we have downloadable audiobooks now that can be played on a little iPod. And this is my son. And it started, my interest in audiobooks really started when my children kept begging me for more and more. And then watching them multitask while they are listening. Here, my son is playing a game on his Android screen while listening to audiobooks. And actually my participants, so I couldn't use my own children in my research, but for ethical reasons, apparently. It was a pity, I thought, that they told me a lot of things that were quite similar to what I've been finding out with my participants doing my data collection. I'm at the end of the second year of collecting data, so I've been talking to a lot of kids about audiobooks. And I went to have a look at the literature to see what research had been done about audiobooks and their impact on literacy. I thought there'd be a whole lot of research, and I kept finding lots of literature that would say there is a great deal of research supporting this, but what I find is that actually it is research that's about parents reading to young children who are not readers. So I wanted to look at people, students who are fluent readers and writers. They're quite often bi or trilingual, my participants, and but they're fluent English speakers, and then they choose to listen to audiobooks in their free time. So this doesn't mean that everybody loves to listen to audiobooks. I completely understand that for some students and for some adults too, that it's not for them. And but what I wanted to make sure is that what I'd like is that every school offer audiobooks to the students that would really like to use them, like to listen to them, and also the ones that don't even know about them. That's what I've been finding with my grade 3, 4, and 5 students, that many of them confuse them with ebooks and don't realize the incredible what's the word I'm looking for? The incredible quality that's available in audiobooks now. So the technology is improving a lot. You can listen to it on your own device. You're not looking like a geek with a special machine. People sometimes think that you're listening to music on your iPod. So I'm researching. Hi, Sarah. Nice that you've joined us. Thank you very much. And I have to find out a little bit more about you when you have a chance to Thank you very much. I just want to make sure you're connected. And actually, Sarah, whereabouts are you from? I won't go back to the map, but if you could just tell me where you're located. I'll let you enter that in. I'm doing research on a school. I've got 5 participants this year. So these are students at an international school in South Korea, and they are from all over the world. There's no 2 nationalities that are repeated, I don't think. I have many multi-ethnic students as well, so they can't really define where they come from. They could be called home anywhere from Norway to South Korea to Australia to America, India, and Venezuela. So they're not really coming from one particular place, but I think the main thing is that what unites us is that we're speaking in English, we conduct school in English, and the audiobooks that I'm providing for students are in English. So thank you, Sarah. That's very interesting that you come from a college professor background. I'd be interested to hear about any experience that you have with audiobooks for your students, actually. So feel free to jump in and chat. But what I was explaining right at the beginning was that my study has found some pretty interesting things about students listening to audiobooks extensively. So what I'm saying is extensive is that average about half an hour a day for like at least half of the school year. I've actually found quite a few of the students listen way more than that. They can listen 2 or 3 hours in a day because they're traveling, or especially also when they're lying in bed at night. So these are pre-adolescent students, and the parents might tell them, okay, you need to turn the light off, but you're allowed to listen to your audiobook while you're falling asleep, and they really enjoy that. It takes their mind off things. So they have found that all of the participants over the 2 years have said that listening to audiobooks has really increased their vocabulary because they hear formal language, and they hear an awful lot of it. They can get through an incredible number of books by listening to audiobooks because they can do it at times when they can't read, for example, when the light's off. They do like to listen to the same books over and over. I know my son, who is not part of the study, but he's listened to the entire Harry Potter series more than 3 times. So he would never have read it that many times. And so that's what I'm finding, that their repeated listening makes them quite critical listeners, and I'm studying their critical literacy skills, the way they sort of, they can actually see when authors make mistakes. They are analysing the literature because they are listening to it so much. Quite often they'll be repeat listening for stories that they like. They also don't seem to really care if their stories come in paper format, ebook. They do read ebooks if they're traveling, but most of them prefer a paper version of the book, or listening to an audio book. Quite often they don't really mind as long as it's a good story. With audiobooks, it's really important for them to have good narrators. They need a narrator that they feel comfortable with and they enjoy listening to. And I'll talk a bit more about that and about different accents in the next slide. They also say that they get story ideas from listening to audiobooks, and when they go to write in class, several of them have described that they can hear an audiobook in their head, and they put several audiobooks together, perhaps even with a movie storyline, and they've described it as the ideas are flowing down my arm and out my pencil, which I think is rather delightful. None of them think that listening to audiobooks helps with spelling or punctuation, though, so I think that's something that they recognize as not being very helpful. One student in particular put this very eloquently. I asked him if his parents liked him listening to audiobooks, and he said yes, they did, because before I listened to audiobooks, my conversation would be filled with but since I've been listening to audiobooks, my presentations in front of class and even my conversations are much more fluid. So I thought that was really a very mature response for a 11-year-old boy. Actually finding quite a lot of boys really like listening to audiobooks. They're also it's interesting that these international school students are really thinking about the accents that they listen to. I'm only studying audiobooks in English, but they really do notice different American and British accents or regional accents, and they need the accent to suit the story. So they're quite particular about the narration. And once again, my son, he's the only person I'm allowed to show photographs of when I'm giving a presentation, but he's quite typical of my participants, that they're multitasking, they're sitting on a bus, playing computer games. I even had one participant saying that he could play computer games and listen to an audiobook and even watch a movie without the sound on, all at the same time. And I thought, that's extraordinary. I'm not quite sure how much we're learning there. But quite often that's for repeat listening, so they already know the story and they can dip in and out of it because they're so familiar with it. So my research is something that doesn't seem to have been done before. I've scoured the literature, and just about they're either using audiobooks for for English as a second language students, or reading difficulties, or they're likening it to a parent reading aloud to a child who's a beginner reader. And I don't believe that's what these professional audiobooks that are narrated by professionals, they're just so much different from a parent reading aloud to children. Plus the participants, I've chosen them to be grade 4 and 5 pre-adolescents because there is some quite convincing research that shows that their listening and reading comprehension is very similar at this age. So I wanted to find out at this age, yes, they are very capable readers, but they choose to also listen to audiobooks, and how does that affect their in-class literacy. So I've given a few presentations like this, and I've been looking for quite a few people to see if other people would be interested in also doing similar research, or just any feedback that you have from any experience that you have with audiobooks and students. So Sarah, are you feeling comfortable to talk, or I'll make sure that your microphone is on. Let me just make sure that it's actually turned on. I believe it is. Oh, okay. No problem. So Sarah's on mobile, that's fine. Does that mean that it's difficult to chat? It could well be. Okay, no problem. I can understand completely. So if you do have any questions, though, I'd be happy to, or any comments, thoughts, ideas, we're very happy to hear from you.
I'm interested in the speed at which the playback is used. I find that I tend to listen to audiobooks at about twice the normal speed. Okay,
that's quite interesting. I had tried that because I'm actually getting, there's a lot of technical difficulties in arranging audiobooks through a library. Unfortunately, that's a whole different story that gives me lots of room to explain on my dissertation. But the playback speed, I don't actually offer an alternative for most of to the students. They're just listening to it at the pace that it's been recorded. So yes, they could. They've never said anything about that. I don't enjoy it at anything else other than the natural spoken speed, but I can see how it could be appealing to some people who would like to get through something a bit faster. And you're talking about parallel thinking process that takes place when I listen. Actually, that's quite interesting because often we don't tend to pause an audiobook. We'll just keep listening to it. Whereas when we're reading, I find that most people will stop and sort of gaze out and think about the words. But some people say that some of the research is saying that listening to audiobooks is a much more focused in interpretation of the story because you've got the sound of the possible sound effects, but you've got the emotion of the reader's voice there. But the trouble is, you're not necessarily concentrating on it if you're multitasking, and so often we do multitask, even if it's just walking while we're listening. We tend to be looking at everything else around us as well. So we're not. My research doesn't cover that, but I do find it very interesting that there is just so much scope for research in this topic, actually, that hasn't been done. We assume it's been done, but it hasn't been, because it's certainly not available anyway. So when you read an e-book, you have to highlight to do some form of memory processing. Actually, that's interesting because as people who have grown up in a reading culture, and especially as they get older through school, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to choose these pre-adolescent students, because their listening and reading comprehension is very similar, and so they haven't learned to rely on the written word, and they'll remember a lot that they've heard. Whereas I feel like some of the older generation, like myself included, that we rely on everything being written down. I write notes all the time. I highlight all the time. Whereas if you didn't, if you hadn't grown up with that, or actually I just heard a story from Malcolm Gladwell about this in his David and Goliath book about a dyslexic person who ended up becoming a lawyer because even though he couldn't read all his coursework or anything very well, very fast, he was incredibly good at remembering what people had said, and so he didn't really need to take notes because that part of his had been that part of his brain had been developed as he was a child that didn't read. He just listened. He listened to parents reading to him. Yes. So Steve, you're saying, I'm just finding that yes. So Steve, you're saying that when you listen, you have to write notes. Yeah, actually, I've come to even go for walks with a piece of paper and a pen while listening to the audiobook. So it does depend on what I'm listening to, I think. So remembering and understanding the flow of thought, especially for non-fiction, yeah, because I've been listening to a lot of non-fiction audiobooks at the moment, and that's certainly the case that I don't take all the points in. However, this is where repeated listening comes in, I think, for many of the students, that they really like a story. They're mostly listening to fiction, and quite often fantasy fiction as well, and the narrator puts that extra emphasis of emotion in there as well. They really like it that the narrator has pronounced some of the difficult names for them too. And yes, I think that there's quite different things going on in our brains when we listen to fiction or non-fiction as opposed to reading it. But I do go through an awful lot of books that I've been meaning to read, and I feel like I can talk about them after I've listened to the audiobook, but perhaps I'd never get the time to actually read the text version. So I'm very glad for yeah, so fiction you can listen at quite a fast speed. Actually, most of the participants who like, when they're talking about fiction, they really like long fiction stories. So quite often they'll say to me, I want something longer than 10 hours. Hi, Sarah. If you'd like to say anything, Sarah, just jump in. That's fine. I just saw you flash up on the screen then. I didn't hear anything though. The students really like listening to long stories because they want to spend longer with the characters. I think they sort of feel like they're keeping them company. And they say, we hate short stories. We only want something that's sort of epic. And the quality of the narrator, absolutely. And they have to hear, and especially children, they're very fussy, I found, rightly so. And they have to listen to a sample of the narrator before they'll agree to listen to it. So they read the blurb and then they listen to a sample of the narrator and then say, yes, okay, I'll give that a try. And they don't like any clicking noises or gasps or and students recording their own versions of books. Yes, I haven't. Actually, in one of the presentations I gave, they were talking about teachers using podcasts for students. I think that's a great idea. It's not what my research is about, though. I really wanted to just look at professional audiobooks. I found that the free ones are not engaging for most students, and so we need a professional narrator and usually quite a popular book as well, so not necessarily an old version of a story. Yeah, I understand. I've listened to quite a few. I really do compare to the professional narrators, though. And I'm very happy to pay for the professional version. But yes, I think I admire the people who have recorded on LibriVox. But I must admit, I haven't quite got through an entire story yet on those ones. It sounds terrible. So is there any other questions or comments? Or because I might actually end this at sort of the 9:30 mark if yeah, I like Jane Austen. I get quite cheap Jane Austens, relatively cheap, but very good narrators, various ones over the years. Nothing recent though. Does any of your research deal with ESL and adults? No, unfortunately. So I have purposefully steered away from ESL use of audiobooks. There is research about ESL use of audiobooks. It's not very extensive. And then, to be honest, I don't think I have found any or very little about adults. I have found some sort of articles about adults, young adults, and offering audiobooks through a university library, but that hasn't really taken off, probably because the copyright regulations are so stringent and very, very expensive for libraries to loan. So I'm really basically recommending to my students that they sign up for multiple purchase with Audible or some place like that. I did have a very good company called AudioGo in the UK that was supplying audiobooks for our library, but they went out of business. So unfortunately that is no longer available. Yes, there's huge history of audiobooks for the blind, and there has been bit of research on that too, but not nearly as much as there should be, I don't think, but that's not my area of expertise either. So, but if I lose my eyesight, this is what I'll be spending the rest of my life doing. Yes, I really like what Audible have done. Actually, I thought Audible was quite expensive, but then I delved a bit closer, and for very keen audiobook listeners, you can get 24 audiobooks for about $220. Now that might sound horrendous to some people, but it's actually an incredibly good price for the quality of audiobooks that you're getting. So I'm absolutely addicted to that, and quite often so there's less than $10 an audiobook, and I am making full use of it. I always get the sort of I had a 45-hour audiobook about Hitler for that price too, so I thought that was good value for money. But yes, the device independence, you can put them on anything, and the prices are getting much better for individual purchases. Just not for libraries though, which is really annoying for librarians. So anything else, or should I just wrap it up and let everybody go off to work? Or
I'm so glad that you did record this, and I know that with a limited audience that can be daunting, but we did get a couple in and do have a nice international crowd. I'm so glad you did it, though.
Thank you, Steve, for the encouragement.
Good. I think you can wrap up.
Okay. I'll stop recording.